Hello, everyone, my dear followers. Welcome to Chapter 12 of this fanfic that has been with us on the channel for so long. If you haven't seen the previous installments, you can find them in a playlist on the channel. Without further ado, enjoy.
Akatsuki hideout. 9 spectral figures gathered around a large, open cavern, each not uttering a single word to the other. With a closer inspection, you could see that the 9 phantom figures were standing on the tips of large fingers, with only the little finger on the left hand lacking a presence on it. Soon each finger began to glow before a black kanji came to life one after one on the fingers. The right thumb glowed with word 0 ling. Next was the right index finger that glowed with the words green, blue, ching. The right middle finger's kanji came up next, and it was for the word white, bai. The next kanji was the kanji that was on the right ring finger, and it showed scarlet, do. The right little finger glowed with the sign associated with the boar, hai. The left little finger did not light up with the rest due to the lack of a spectral figure on the finger. The next finger that was lit up was the left ring finger, and that one was displaying the word south, nan. The left middle finger came up next, and it was glowing with the kanji for north, bai. The left index came next and was showing off the kanji for 3 thun. Finally, the left thumb ended the series of kanji with ball, year. Each person was dressed in robes similar to those of Kurento and Daidara's, despite the color being faded from the technique used to create the projections. The figure on the right thumb, whose eyes were closed, finally opened them to stare at the shinobi on the finger with scarlet glowing. There, for all other 8 members to see, was the ripple pattern that spread across each eye. This was known as the greatest of all dojutsu, the Sasra eye or the Rinnegan. Kurento did his best to not shift under the eyes belonging to the Sage of 6 Paths, which took a great amount of willpower. Deidara glanced at his partner, inwardly relieved that he wouldn't be on the receiving end of that dreadful glare this day. "Why have you failed your mission?" The man with Rinnegan asked, irritability, seeing as how their plan to seal 2 of the Biju at once had failed with the failure of the mission. Failure was not something he wanted to become a regularity. The Akatsuki needed to be precise and clean, not botching any of the chances they had to obtain a Jinchuriki. The Rinnegan wielder had specifically sent Deidara and his partner to retrieve the 5 tails because of the explosives user's knowledge of the land of Earth. The man looked at Kurento with expectation that the excuse that he had come up with was certainly a good one. He hoped so for their sake. "We ran into unforeseen circumstances, Pain-sama, that caused Yus to lose the trail of the Gobi and its container Han." Kurento replied evenly, his nervousness around the leader of the Akatsuki offset by the irritation of losing to Mihawk. Badly, not that he'd admit that. It was a blow to his pride to be dismissed by Mihawk like he was then to be beaten handily only made the feeling grow. What kind of circumstance could take precedent over obtaining one of the Biju? A firm, feminine voice asked in place of Pain. This was Pain's childhood friend who was with the Akatsuki organization since its founding. Konan. Her loyalty belonged to Pain, and she felt that this failure was almost as if they had failed Pain himself, the idea of which was blasphemous to the Kunoichi. "The 2 of us ran into another team of 2 S-rank shinobi, Mihawk Dracule and Itachi Uchiha. The 2 were working in collusion and seemed to know at least something about us, and they stepped in to try and stop us. You called us here mid-fight," Kurento informed the other Akatsuki members with a scowl. "Mihawk Dracule and Itachi Uchiha?" An excited voice asked with a small, appreciative whistle at the prospect of that kind of duo. "That sounds like a whole different kind of 2-headed monster to me. Sasori, we really should try to visit those 2. A large man asked his partner with a large shark-like grin on his face. A frame that was spherical in shape and possibly hunched over gave a small grunt when he heard the question that was asked of him. "Kisame, you are the same battle maniac as always, but yes, I would love an Uchiha puppet to use as art." Sasori's voice was gruff and very deep compared to those who had spoken thus far. Both of those men have quite the pretty bounty placed on their heads. Perhaps I could pay a visit to the 2? A voice that not quite as deep as Sasori's added, with his voice becoming filled with glee when he mentioned the bounties of Itachi and Mihawk. Almost as if money was the driving force behind his life. "Fuck you and your money, Kakuzu. Why the fuck am I paired with this heathen when he would make such a better sacrifice to Jashin-sama?" A figure shouted very loudly with a scythe strapped to his back. Around his neck was a circle with an upside-down triangle within the circle. Pain had, had enough with the useless chatter within his members about their different hobbies and passions. It wasn't helping them with their sealing of Yanbi, and therefore it was unnecessary. That is enough. From now on, if any one of you happen to cross paths with those two while out on your missions, you are to eliminate them. This also means we will need to be more cautious with our activities. For now, focus on finishing on sealing the Yanbi. The other 8 members uttered a yes, leader Sama, in unison before falling silent, focusing on sealing the 4 tails into the giant humanoid statue they were standing on. In the silence, a number of the members looked at the elderly man with red hair, beard and mustache, dressed in a long red-sleeved shirt and pants with mesh armor underneath, the soon-to-be deceased, former Jinchuriki of the 4 Tails Rashi of the lava release. Kanahagakure. Naruto stood there staring distastefully at the Hokage's mansion with his cool blue eyes and dressed in his clothing from the Chunin exams. Now that he was fully recovered, there was now time to deal with the council and their infinite wisdom. Naruto was not staring at the mansion of the Hokage distastefully due to any of kind theological disagreement or anything on that level. He looked at the building the way he did because it was where the council was no doubt waiting. The Chunin exam's winner could already recite the questions he was going to be asked by the fools residing there. In their safety blanket of the council, the fools had become predictable and boring. Naruto figured that if he was being called upon immediately after the Chunin exams, which were his personal coming-out party so to speak, then there were 3 likely parties responsible for this. Hamura, Koharu, and Danzo, 3 advisors from back in the Sandame's reign, each of which was said to love Konoha just as much as Hiruzen, yet the way they went about it was shady at best. Naruto was pretty confident that they would try to pressure and manipulate the laws into making him some sort of weapon or breeding stock to serve the village. And if there was one thing that Naruto wouldn't be, it was manipulated. Naruto strolled into the front of the building, his whole person emitting a cool confidence that had a few people deciding against addressing him. The few people working who were going to say something swallowed down their words nervously when they saw the electric blue eyes that seemed to be staring right through them. Naruto allowed himself to wear the faintest of smirks to come past his face, seeing he was starting to earn respect even if it was out of fear. Naruto walked to the doors of the council chambers and gave the door a momentary glance before entering the room where a number of annoyances were present. Naruto cast an observatory glance across the room, going over each of the clan heads, followed by the 3 advisors and finally the 5 civilian council members. Naruto restrained himself from giving the civilians the leers they were shooting his way. He had no desire to give them any ammunition to use against him, which no doubt would lead to proof of his demonhood. Naruto's azure eyes drifted towards his father with a look of apathy, seeing he had the look of Hokage on his face instead of a father. "You called for my presence, Hokage-sama?" Naruto asked, levelly ignoring the council for the most part. "Yes, Naruto. Due to your performance in the latest Chunin exams, the council has some questions they would like to ask you." Minato spoke seriously, but he had none of these questions that he spoke of, so he remained silent. Naruto nodded and turned to face the council with a stark disinterest. Koharu posed the first question of this council session. "When did you awaken the Sharingan?" The question was blunt and showed no respect, something Naruto had expected. The decrepit, old fossil was nothing but predictable, and Naruto assumed that there would be a follow-up question meant to snare him into being put under their thumb. Naruto closed his eyes, and when he opened them, Naruto showed off his fully matured Sharingan. "I came upon these eyes during my time outside of the village's walls." Naruto spoke calmly, his eyes looking past the old woman at the wall behind her, blatantly. The woman frowned, but if it was because of his answer, of his actions was not determinable. The civilians had to bite their lower lip to detain from defaming the Uchiha Jinchuriki. "What did you do during this time that awakened the Uchiha's bloodline?" Hamura asked sternly, looking at the teen that stood at front of them completely at ease. The elderly man frowned at the confidence the boy was showing. It was too unfounded in his opinion, and it could spell trouble in the future. "I will not be divulging my activities during that time, seeing as how I was not an active shinobi in Konoha's system." Naruto spoke evenly as he glanced at the male who had posed the question with an almost dismissive glance. Hamura's brow twitched slightly at the refusal Naruto had given to him, but he was beaten to responding by an outburst of a civilian. "Silence, boy! You are lucky to even be standing here, so stop being difficult and answer the questions of the council." The man shouted down at Naruto, wisely avoiding the word demon that would have only brought him a swift death. The man was well into his life and was dressed lavishly. Naruto glanced at the civilian parasite with his Sharingan spinning menacingly, while his lips gave no facial expression. You civilian are lucky to even be here, considering this is clearly a matter between shinobi. It would be wise for you to sit down and silence yourself before I do it for you. Naruto spoke firmly while directing a small dose of killing intent at the man that made Naruto look like he was wearing the mask of the Shinigami. Hiruzen, who was sitting at the seat for the Sarutobi clan, looked at Naruto and shivered slightly, as he had a flashback of the times he had met Madara Uchiha. That man was able to inspire fear with his glance, all the while looking completely bored, much like Naruto was doing just now. Now that I think about it, his hairstyle is very much like that of Madara's. All he is missing is that armor. Then why not tell the Hokage of your Sharingan when you came back to the village for service, Naruto-san? Inoichi Yamanaka, the clan head of the Yamanaka, asked curiously, giving Naruto a pleasant surprise with how respectfully he had addressed him. Naruto looked at the man who leaned back into his seat when his eyes made contact with Naruto's Sharingan. During my time away from the village, the Uchiha were slaughtered. What was to stop the same thing from happening to me? Naruto asked rhetorically, his eyes surveying the room without his head moving. Naruto ignored the skeptical looks he was getting. Hayashi and some of the other clan heads. Internally, Shikaku, the clan leader of the Nara, was smirking at how Naruto had played the situation. It was obviously a lie considering just who his parents were, but it was constructed in such a way that it could easily be considered a truthful explanation. The Nara clan head, who was a very perceptive man, realized just how dangerous Naruto could be. That brought a smile on to Shikaku's face. May I ask that you tell us of where your Uchiha blood comes from, Naruto-san? Shibi Aburame, the Aburame clan head, was a man not to be swayed by emotional appeals but rather cold-hearted logic and factual statements. Naruto looked at the man and wondered if all Aburame wore glasses and hid their faces behind overly large trench coats. I am afraid I cannot, Shibi-san, seeing as that would be a clan secret. Naruto replied defiantly, using the excuse of it being a clan secret to hide the fact that he and Itachi had yet to determine the answer to that question. He didn't need to tell this power grab of a council that, however. Koharu's face twisted up in agitation, seeing how this boy had not given them anything thus far despite the things they already knew. He was being vague and gave no details, which annoyed her to no end. It was this culmination of factors that led to her angry outburst, which was directed at Naruto. We are the council, boy. You will answer the questions of your superiors, and you will do it satisfactorily. Surprisingly, it was not Naruto who responded to her demand, but when he realized just who responded on his behalf, it was no longer really that surprising. Watch yourself, advisor. What you are demanding is an Uchiha clan secret and will set a dangerous precedent for all of the clans. Mikoto spoke heatedly, taking up Naruto's defense, getting the teen to crack a smile in gratitude, seeing how she played along. Koharu, seeing that all of the clan heads nodded their head with the Uchiha matriarch's words, backed down, but she was still wearing a prominent frown. Kushina cleared her throat, getting the eyes of her son to snap towards her. The Uzumaki woman decided now was the time to get the answer to the question she posed in the hospital room. Naruto, I would like to ask you about the Fuinjutsu technique you used during your second match in the exams. Kushina spoke calmly, looking at her son directly to try and find any sign of anything. Unfortunately for her, Naruto's body showed nothing but a stoic visage, like nothing could bother or fluster him. Tell me, do you know what makes an Uzumaki clan head? Naruto wondered aloud, seemingly had to disregard Kushina's question, but Kushina knew that Naruto kept his word over anything else, so she wasn't bothered by his own question. Kushina leaned back into her chair, and her eyes closed, trying to remember what Mido Uzumaki had told her so long ago. Minato and all the other shinobi on the council looked over at the red-headed woman, curious as to what the answer was themselves. Kushina's eyes suddenly flipped open, and she let out a small gasp at the implications of Naruto's question. Her son couldn't be the Uzumaki clan head. When she wasn't, it wouldn't make sense. The room all looked at Kushina curiously, except for Naruto, as he waited for his mother to verbally connect the dots for the rest of the room, who were clearly waiting anxiously. Why, you're the Uzumaki clan head? Naruto-kun? She asked, her voice trembling slightly in shock. Naruto didn't answer that either. Instead, the young Uchiha took one step back away from the large desk. Naruto took his deep blue vest off along with his chain mesh underneath, leaving his torso bare, shocking the room with his brash actions. Naruto brought his hand up to his heart where an Uzumaki swirl was resting on his skin. Naruto spoke like he was reading from an old scroll or tome. The Uzumaki swirl over the heart of an Uzumaki shows the sign of the current clan head and can't be removed until the clan head names a successor or dies. But how? I visited the ruins of Yuzu and I couldn't access the main chamber even with my entire prowess in the art of sealing. How did you get in when even your mother couldn't get in? Kushina asked, watching as Naruto redressed himself and regarded her with a bored stare directed at her. The woman did her best not to shy away from her son's Sharingan stare, but returned it with a determined one. The Uzumaki clan was a clan not only known for their phenomenal skill in Fuinjutsu, but also for their love for those around them. The clan head of the Uzumaki is a person whose heart is strong but also holds the most love in it. It is my heart that met those requirements and granted me access to the main chamber. Naruto spoke calmly, drawing in even Minato in the short but informative tale of the clan long lost. Most of the shinobi found themselves admiring the goals of the Uzumaki and could only imagine if they remained thriving in this age. Danzo, who had remained silent throughout the entire council session, was staring at Naruto with no small amount of intensity. The shinobi in front of him came from two prestigious clans that, despite their weakened, almost non-existent state, held no small amount of potential. The secret commander of Root knew he couldn't take the boy because he had become too visible in Konoha, but he could use the boy for the betterment of Konoha. There could be no way that Naruto would turn down his proposition since it could be considered a dream to many a person. All he needed to do was offer it. Seeing as Naruto possesses the blood of both the Uchiha clan and Uzumaki clan, I recommend that we put him under the Clan Restoration Act. This way we can strengthen both clans and maybe combine them if possible. Danzo spoke calmly, looking at Naruto with his one good eye, seeing if the boy would give him any kind of usable reaction. Naruto stared up at the War Hawk and the two were engaged in a battle of wills. Danzo and Naruto both missed the dangerous looks in the eyes of Kushina and Mikoto directed at the Shimura as they stared each other down. Minato and Hiruzen were able to keep a much more neutral look, but it was clear they didn't like the idea either. Just when it looked as if someone would speak on his behalf, Naruto answered, "No." Koharu looked down at Naruto, if such a thing was possible, with a smug smirk on her face, almost as if Naruto's answer was pathetic. Naruto didn't seem to notice the look on her face because he didn't find her worth any of his attention. "You have no choice in this, boy. This is an order from the council. We practically own you." The word choice earned her frowns from the shinobi and smirks from the civilians. Naruto had to resist the urge to roll his eyes at the foolish woman who was clearly drunk with her own power. Then again he knew that it would only make this next part all the more enjoyable. "You do not have a choice in the matter. I am the clan head of the Uzumaki, and as such I come from a clan that did not originate in Konohagakure. You have no power to hold a foreign clan head to your laws. It is only because that there was no real clan head that you are allowed to remain using the swirl on your uniforms in the first place." Danzo and Hamura glared down at Naruto, who continued to try and successfully defy them at every turn. Danzo was sure that Naruto would accept what he was offering to him, but the Uchiha had proven to be abnormal. The teen was offered an assortment of women for him to indulge himself in, yet he had basically said that he had no interest in that. Danzo's hand clutched his cane tightly because that unpredictability meant he was dangerous. Naruto is right about that. Even though he has the blood of an Uchiha, his position as the clan head of the Uzumaki supersedes the Uchiha part. We hold nothing over Naruto. Hiruzen spoke with experience, having read over the act that Hashirama had created many times during his time as the Hokage. Naruto said nothing and only nodded, glad that he wouldn't have to explain himself any further. The lone woman on the civilian council sent a cruel smirk towards Naruto, who remained stoic as usual. Naruto could see the gears turning in her more than likely hate-filled mind and waited for her surefire way to try and screw him over. "Then why are we keeping the Uzumaki in the village walls when he could be a threat to our safety?" the woman asked, implying that perhaps Naruto should be exiled. Naruto mentally congratulated the woman for putting a halfway decent proposition on the table instead of an irrational piece of garbage. Naruto looked at the woman with a bored expression. The only thing on his face that was moved was one of his eyebrows. "You speak as if I am afraid of being banished from this village?" Minato's normally welcoming blue eyes hardened where he saw this was going, and he was certain that he wasn't going to lose his son just because a civilian who shouldn't even be present couldn't shut her mouth. That's enough. We will not be banishing or kicking my son out of the village, and that's final. Now then, is there anything else that needs to be discussed before this meeting is closed? To the surprise of nearly everyone that was gathered, it was Naruto who had spoken when the final call was given. Yes, I have something I would like to bring up. There was a girl named Fu who tried to break into my apartment complex, which in essence is the Uzumaki compound. That girl is Taki's Jinchuriki. Hamura spoke up, cutting off Naruto from making the point he wanted to make. Something Naruto did not find amusing if the glare he leveled the elder man with was any indication. The glare silenced the elder, who could see how irritated Naruto was, but said nothing, afraid the Uzumaki might lash out at him, then deal with the consequences. As I was saying before the annoying interruption, I caught Fu trying to break into my complex where there are things that are sensitive to my clan. It is for that reason that I thought it would be wise to inform you that I would be detaining her personally. Naruto's agitation quickly faded back into nothing more than a neutral drawl. Throughout the entire point, Naruto was staring at the yellow flash, whose was the only opinion that mattered. We can't take Taki's Jinchuriki. They have been our allies for decades. If we were to take their weapon, they would surely retaliate. Koharu screeched out, indignantly getting a nod from Hamura. Danzo showed nothing, since having the Seven Tails in Konoha would definitely be a power boost, but it could also cause more problems than it was worth in the end. Is it not the law that if an intruder is caught breaking into the compound of any clan currently residing in Konoha, that the clan leader has the express right to either detain or execute the perpetrator? Hayashi-san? Naruto spoke, looking at the stoic clan head of the Hyuga, whose eyes narrowed upon being addressed. The Hyuga patriarch knew the incident that Naruto was referring to, but wondered how Naruto knew about that, since it happened when he was 5. Could he have possibly prepared that much? Which were the Hyuga's thoughts. When Hinata was 5, a representative from Kumo came to the village to create a treaty, but that was only a cover to try and steal the Byakugan, and to do so he tried to kidnap Hinata. He managed to catch up to the man, and instead of detaining the man, he killed him swiftly. Hayashi nodded his head slightly, not once losing his composure. That is correct. I am choosing to take the girl as a slave, if you will, instead of killing her. That is my choice. Naruto spoke calmly despite the foul taste that was left in his mouth from calling Fu a slave. That was another thing Naruto loathed about politics. He hated having to speak like a drone without the ability to speak normally. Very well, I will send a letter to the leader in Taki explaining the situation. That is the end of this meeting. Minato spoke behind his laced-together fingers, allowing the counselors to get out of the stuffy room. Minato looked at his son sadly just from the thought of him taking a slave. It wasn't right. Oh, and from now on I am either to be called Naruto Uchiha or Naruto Uzumaki. With that, Naruto disappeared in a wind shunshin, and the only thing Minato saw as he left was the charm Narumi had bought for Naruto was the charm with the initials UN. Naruto was sitting across from Mikoto with the woman glaring holes into Naruto's skull, while he looked sheepish at the woman he saw as his true mother. Naruto knew that as soon as she got a hold from him, he was in for a scolding, so her Sharingan glare was not so bad compared to what he thought he was going to get. He expected she would be angry at him for holding out on the Sharingan, but he had his reasons, and hopefully she would understand that. That didn't stop Naruto from sighing in relief when Mikoto finally let her Sharingan recede back into her natural dark eyes. Naruto, why didn't you tell me that you had the Sharingan? And don't bother trying to say that you just got it, because I know a fully matured Sharingan when I see one. Mikoto scolded Naruto sternly, which he responded to by staring at her determinately. Mikoto sighed internally when she saw that look that he would give her back in his childhood. It was that look that told her Naruto would not back down from this. I didn't come to you with this because it would be easier to keep you safe if you didn't know about it. Naruto spoke with a voice full of conviction as his blue eyes stared right into Mikoto's black ones. There was no doubt in the Uzumaki clan head's mind that he had made the right choice in doing so. Mikoto didn't move a muscle as she continued to stare at her surrogate son, trying to find anything in his facial features, but there was nothing, just like Itachi. She knew that it wasn't because Naruto didn't trust her. He did it to protect her, and she understood that, but it was still frustrating to be left in the dark. Why? I could have helped you try and figure out why there is Uchiha blood inside of you in the first place. Naruto smiled a genuine smile when he heard the care inside of Mikoto's soft voice. Glad. that she hadn't changed having to deal with Sasuke for so long. Naruto shook his head softly with a small smile, getting a frown from the older Uchiha. I don't think you could have Mikoto-chan. Itachi-sensei and I visited a number of old Uchiha hideouts he used during his ANBU days and we couldn't find anything. And this way I could keep you out of the crossfire in case I let something slip. Naruto added on, kindly, getting a small smile from Mikoto, who was glad to see Naruto still had that caring side. Mikoto shook her head in amusement with a small giggle, getting Naruto to turn his head to the side in curiosity. Mikoto waved Naruto's questioning look off with a small wave from her hand as she reined in her laughter. Looking at Naruto, she gave the boy a large smile that he returned on a smaller scale. Fine, I understand why you did what you did. From now on, however, I want to promise me that you will not keep things like that from me. Naruto's frowned slightly when Mikoto assertively badgered him into promising her to be more open. But, I said promise me, Naruto-kun. Mikoto exclaimed firmly, getting Naruto to curse internally at his need to fulfill his words. He wasn't sure why he was intrinsically motivated to keep promises, since he was sure that he was the only Uchiha that was like that. Then Naruto cursed himself for being so different, since it made things more difficult. Fine, I promise I won't keep the big things from you anymore. Naruto relented with a defeated sigh, getting Mikoto to smile victoriously. Naruto smiled when he saw her smile, knowing he couldn't deny his mother figure for too long before he caved. But that was okay for him, since she was one of his precious people. Now then, you can tell me why you plan on taking that young girl as a slave instead of letting her return home. Mikoto spoke with an overly sweet smile that told Naruto if he gave her the wrong answer, then he would be in a world of pain. That danger registered with Naruto, immediately making him wave his hands in defense furiously. Seeing that the smile did not fade away, Naruto swallowed down the nervous feeling that only a few people could instill in him. Naruto, remembering just what Fu told him about her past, became serious, something Mikoto noticed and looked at Naruto in worry. I didn't meet Fu by chance. When I reached the tower in the second stage, I overheard her teammates calling her a demon and things of that nature. So I went to talk to her, and her story wasn't a happy one. She wasn't beaten like I was, but instead she was completely isolated by everyone in Taki. She didn't have someone like you taking care of her like you did for me. We came up with this plan, and that slave part is just a cover, so I can keep her near me and give her a friend. Naruto's eyes iced over, giving them a cool determination that Mikoto knew all too well. At first mention of this idea of a slave at the council meeting, Mikoto was going to go out of her way to correct that sideways form of thinking, but she wanted to give Naruto a chance to explain himself. Now, hearing his reasoning, she couldn't be more proud of the little boy she knew all those years ago that was becoming a fine man. I think you are getting soft, Naruto-kun. I knew that tough guy act was all for show. Mikoto said happily, getting a small tick mark to form on Naruto's forehead. Mikoto saw it and giggled into her hand, having missed being able to tease the young man across from her. Yup, just one big old softy. Hey! Naruto, in the aftermath of talking with Mikoto about everything that has happened around him, trudged back into his apartment complex, drained of all his energy. Naruto opened the door and found his slave seated on his couch watching television. She gave Naruto a bright smile, and the two talked for about a half of an hour about what happened in Naruto's day. Naruto was about to stand up, head to his bedroom where he could rest and hopefully recharge his batteries after that dull meeting with the council. The talk with Mikoto wasn't as bad, but he was still drained from before that, so he was still feeling a bit tired. Naruto smiled at the thought of getting some meaningful sleep. Just before Naruto could take a step away, Fu tugged on his arm, forcefully forcing him to take the seat next to her on the couch. Fu glanced up at him with her orange eyes and gave him a brilliant smile. Come on, Naruto-kun, you could at least relax and watch some television with me. Naruto looked down at her and couldn't find himself able to deny the woman her request, and relented with a quick nod and a small grin. Fu cheered, quietly getting a chuckle from Naruto, who got comfortable. Fu wrapped her arms around Naruto's arm and leaned her head on his shoulder, obviously getting comfortable herself. The pair watched any and everything until the sun went down, when Naruto felt the need to get up and stretch before going to bed. Looking down at his shoulder, he saw that Fu was already asleep with a small smile on her face. Naruto decided against waking her up after a few moments of deliberation. In the end, Naruto just brushed off her actions as her need for some form of emotional support from her only friend. Naruto was unaware that the feelings were anything more than those of friendship. Naruto looked up to the roof of his apartment complex before leaning his head back into his couch. I guess this is comfortable enough. Naruto thought contently as his eyes slowly closed and he faded into the land of slumber with Fu sleeping happily on his shoulder. It was quite the scene for the third-party Suisei who was watching from the balcony. You called for me? Naruto asked as he looked at his father who was calmly seated behind his desk looking straight back at Naruto. Naruto was dressed in his blue vest with the trident separating the two clan emblems. Lower body equipped with black shinobi pants and twilight clipped on a sword belt around his waist. Naruto was geared up and ready for his first mission as a chunin of the village hidden in the leaves. Minato nodded his head slowly and thumbed through a stack of papers, nodding when he found the piece of paper he was looking for. Handing the paper over to his son, Minato spoke. Yes, I did, Naruto. You have been called to take this mission. Minato began before waiting for his son to read over the parameters of his first mission as a team leader. Naruto's eyebrow rose almost up to his hairline as he finished going over everything in the report with his deep blue pools. Minato began once more now that he had the Chunin's full attention. You are being assigned a team to deal with the elimination of the Fuma clan. Minato spoke seriously, getting Naruto to nod in acceptance, having already read over what the goal of the mission was. As you have read, the request comes from Tsunade, who has been having issues with the Fuma as of late. Before Tsunade could finish the job, the Fuma clan fled to the Land of Rivers before settling in a new compound inside of the Land of Fire to escape their persecution. We can't have too many Tsunade running around unchecked in the area, even if they are our allies. That is why we are sending you and a team to take care of things quietly. Minato said, looking right at his son, who didn't seem to even be bothered by what he was saying to him. Tsunade is asking us to finish what they started but couldn't finish themselves. I doubt they told you what the Fuma clan did that warrants elimination, but that probably doesn't matter at this point. Did Tsunade send a team that I need to work in tandem with? If Naruto was being honest, he knew that could be a problem. Having to deal with a Tsunade or two that would have more experience meant he would have to deal with them trying to usurp his authority. Then, much to Naruto's surprise, the Hokage shook his negatively. Naruto was left baffled by the choice Tsunade had made. No, Tsunade will not be an active participant in this mission, according to the Kazekage, though he did not specify why. If I had to make a guess, it is probably because they are fearful of what may happen if they operate in a foreign land. They are still recovering from the last war. Minato spoke speculatively as he looked at Naruto, who didn't offer any insight on the subject he was not knowledgeable in. Naruto was simply surprised that Tsunade would allow Konoha to deal with one of their clans on their own, something the Konoha Council would never allow. Hell would freeze over before that could happen. That is intriguing that Tsunade would let us handle such a delicate matter alone without their supervision. Naruto mused aloud, getting Minato to frown but nod his head along with his son's train of thought. Naruto looked back at his father when it looked like the man had something to say in response to his harmless musings. Why is that so surprising? We are their only allies as of the moment, so it is only natural that they rely on us every now and then. Minato said optimistically, a clear contrast from his son's natural cynicism. Naruto looked at his father with an arched eyebrow, saying, "Do you really believe that?" Naruto shook his head in disagreement with what the village's Kage had just said, finding himself to be thinking the exact opposite. A treaty is just as sturdy as the paper that it is written on. Don't think for a second that Tsunade wouldn't stab us in the back if they had enough incentive to do so. Before Minato could respond to Naruto's grim assessment of what village cooperation was, the doors to the office opened up and in walked 3 shinobi. Naruto and Minato both looked at the shinobi of Team 9. None of the elder genin looked any different from how they were at the Chunin exams. Once the 3 genin got over the shock of seeing Naruto standing in front of them, their emotions returned back to normal. Niji looked as serious as ever. Tenten looked both friendly but ready to go, and Liwell, he looked like he was ready to explode at any moment. Naruto hoped to keep the mentions of youth as low as possible during this mission, his first. Turning around, Naruto gave each of his subordinates a keen once over, getting their bodies to straighten up. Report to the gate in an hour and don't be late. Naruto ordered, getting 3 nods from Team 9 before they left just as quickly as they came. Naruto turned back to face his father with a blank look on his face, but he did narrow his eyes at the man. Are they aware of the mission I am taking them on? Naruto asked suspiciously and groaned when he saw that Minato shook his head negatively. Naruto's eyes narrowed even further, hiding most of his blue irises. Have they ever killed anyone? Naruto spoke, his voice growing ever more irritated with the situation his father had given to him. He couldn't possibly have given him an elimination mission with a team shinobi who have yet to end a life. Naruto suddenly doubted that statement when he saw his father's eyes widen like he just remembered something. Minato regained his composure and gave Naruto a serious stare, showing just why he could lead a village like Konoha. Naruto resisted the urge to groan and the huge overlooking of how Team 9 had completed their missions. No, I don't believe Guy has had them kill any bandits or shinobi as of yet. You have to be kidding. You want me to do an elimination mission with a group of shinobi who haven't killed yet? That is something their sensei should have done long ago. And I don't want to hear about how Konoha is morally above something like that. Naruto ranted, more than rightfully annoyed by the handicaps he had been dealt. What do I do if they refuse to kill the Fuma? Minato didn't reprimand his shinobi for the outburst because he had forgotten to check on the genin to see if they had taken alive yet. Sadly, that was the best Minato could do for his son at this point in time. It is true that this would usually be a mission for a group of Chunin, but with the mission traffic from the Chunin exams, this was the best they had. If they refuse to follow out with the mission objective, then tell them they will be on house arrest for 3 months and not even Guy will be able to do anything about it. My orders. That gave Naruto reason to smile, since he figured there would be objections about the mission, but this meant one less thing for him to deal with. Hi, Hokage-sama. Oh, and Naruto, when I say elimination, I mean it. Make sure no one in that settlement survives. Minato spoke seriously, giving Naruto the cruel but necessary command, getting a dutiful nod from the Uzumaki clan head. Underneath Konohagakure, Danzo stood in front of a mirror as he looked into the glass, where his reflection met him with an equally serious expression. Only what Danzo was seeing was something very different from the reality of the situation he was in. The Danzo in the mirror was with one crucial addition, and that was with the hat belonging to the Hokage settled on his head with a satisfied smile on his time-withered face. Then, just like someone had broken him from a genjutsu, Danzo was left looking back at reality. A reality where he was still in the shadows. Bringing his hand over the side of his face that was not bandaged, Danzo scowled. Damn you, Hiruzen. Damn you, Minato. You stole Konoha from me and stopped it from becoming the dominant force in the world. And now I am relegated here to the shadows while you bask in the light. Danzo knew that even with his secret ace in the hole, that beating Minato was still slim at best. If Hiruzen was still the acting Hokage, Danzo had no doubt he could defeat him and rebuild a better Konoha from the ashes if need be. However, that was all taken away from him by Hiruzen. First he was named third Hokage, then he handed it off to his groomed prodigy. Danzo reeled back his emotions when he realized that they threatened to escape the mental pen he had them pushed into. Walking back to his throne underneath Konoha, the only sound in the darkness was the constant tapping of his walking cane on the stone floor. Taking a seat, Danzo proceeded to wait for his agent to come back and report back to him. Danzo knew that the only person who could possibly match his work in the shadows would be Orochimaru, but the snake was too obsessed with his world than the real world. Yet, if he wandered out of his hole, then Danzo would make sure the head was cut from the snake. There was a slight shift in darkness that alerted Danzo to the arrival of the shinobi he was waiting for. The shinobi was lean, and his spiky mop of dull black hair was facing down from the act of submission, bowing. Only a part of his nose and his mouth were showing, and the rest of his face was covered by a black mask. The teen was wearing a high-collared black outfit with a red sash tied around his waist. He had a black apron that fell over his black pants and black gloves covering his hands. Over the outfit was a black jacket with red straps over the shoulders, something customary for all root shinobi. Danzo-sama, I have confirmed that Naruto Uchiha has left the village to deal with the Fuma clan as requested by Suna. The shinobi's tone was empty of everything but loyalty to the man seated on the throne. The teen's eyes were trained on the ground, almost as if he was afraid to make eye contact with the shinobi on the underground throne. Danzo's head moved up and down slightly, not that his subordinate was aware of the action. Root's commander tapped his cane on the floor, an act he had done many times while coming up with ideas. Danzo opened his one green eye and looked down at the raven-haired Root member. What of his team? The raven-haired minion of the old war hawk answered after a pregnant pause, not expecting that to be of consequence. However, he had the information ready for his lord for this very reason. Naruto Uchiha was seen leaving the village with Madogai's team of genin towards the Fuma clan's last known location. That is good news. That team assignment will certainly make this operation more likely to go in my favor. Danzo spoke, clearly pleased by the developments surrounding Naruto and his mission. This was the first step on his plan to finally get the son of the Hokage firmly under his thumb and into route. The shinobi looked at the floor, but his eyes were certainly reflecting the unsure feelings he was currently experiencing. He wasn't sure if he was speaking out of place, but he was curious as to what his master meant. I don't believe I follow your logic, Danzo-sama. Wouldn't be easier to kidnap the Uchiha if he was alone. That may be true, but as of late Naruto has been very active in Konoha, and his disappearance would raise questions. However, his first mission as a Chunin is with a team that has shown to be very successful. If he was to fail the mission and maybe lose one of those genin, his credit would go down the drain. Tori and I want you to visit the Fuma clan and warn them about the team coming to handle their elimination. Danzo's lips curled up into a disturbing smirk as the newly identified Toryun uttered a "Hi Danzo-sama," and shined out of the area. Danzo strengthened his grip around the handle on his walking cane as he got back to his feet and closed his eye. I will take pleasure in slowly ruining your life, Minato. I will ruin your life just like you ruined mine when you took the seat of Hokage from me. Maybe Danzo couldn't take the seat from Minato at this time, but he could do the next best thing. That thing would be taking away the man's strongest shinobi and turning him into one of his personal soldiers that would eventually lead him to the Hokage's seat. Then he would have Minato stand in submission as his son took his life after he had taken the life from the rest of his family. Danzo laughed. He actually released a dry, croaking laugh as the image of what he just painted came to full life in his mind. Danzo nodded as his laughter faded, thinking just how appropriate that would be. He would groom his own protege and he would dispose of the yellow flash once and for all. Danzo slowly walked into the shadows where he would wait till the time was right, like he had always done. The sound of the forest filled the immediate area with small rustling, the occasional call of an owl, and a number of other nocturnal animals. The crackling of burning wood accompanied the sounds of the forest. The brilliant orange glow of the fire bathed the ground around the site of the kindling. The fire illuminated a number of rocks, each shaped differently, 3 tents and 2 logs. The stars shone down on the peaceful scene, with the moon taking center stage in the night sky. There were 4 presences sitting in on this scene, each remaining silent for the time being. Naruto looked across at his 3 subordinates blankly, with the look being returned by Neji and Tenten, but Lee's look was much more enthusiastic. Naruto and his team were taking the one break that was necessary for the shinobi before they could make it to their destination. Naruto had yet to explain to the 3 genin what the mission entailed, but he was sure that it wouldn't be a pleasant experience. Giving the moon one last whimsical glance, Naruto turned his attention back towards his team for the mission. Seeing their attention had been drawn into the ever-changing fire, Naruto cleared his throat, bringing their eyes back to him. Naruto almost chuckled at the symbolism of the 3 being seated on one log and he on the other. Alright, now it is time that we go over the mission and its details. Suna has asked us as their allies to take care of a problem they have been having in regards to the Fuma clan. They have requested Konoha to take the mission of eliminating the Fuma clan, and that is what we are going to do. Naruto told his team bluntly, not feeling the need to sugarcoat it for them like children. Naruto watched as all 3 pairs' eyes widened in surprise and maybe horror. Naruto wasn't sure. Naruto tried not to grin at his luck as he glanced down at the raging fire of the camp. Naruto blinked once before looking back up at the genin to see if they had come to terms with what they had to do. Naruto was glad to see that Neji looked unsure, but overall he looked ready to do what he needed to. Tenten looked uneasy about the whole thing, but when she saw Naruto's blue eyes on her, she nodded hesitantly. If it was the mission, it had to be done. Finally, Naruto looked over to Lee and frowned. Naruto found himself to be frowning because Lee looked absolutely appalled by what Naruto had just said. Naruto gave Lee a derisive stare that did nothing to deter the outburst coming. We can't just eliminate a whole group of people just like that. It is simply inhumane to do something so unyouthful. I can't kill people who have never wronged me, Naruto-san. Lee cried out passionately, his bandaged hands clenched in a fit of anger. Naruto could only shake his head at the childish belief. Perhaps Lee shouldn't have been a shinobi if wasn't ready to kill even when the mission called for it. Naruto closed his eyes, full ready to bring the weight behind his position down on the defiant genin, since it was clear that it was needed. Naruto stared solely at Lee, who was actually glaring at him. You do not have a choice in the matter, Lee, you really don't. This is what the mission calls for us to do, and not complying is insubordination, which is grounds for shinobi review, at least for a genin it is. Naruto warned the fuzzy-browed genin, trying to get him to fall in line before he would make a mistake that he would regret in the future. Tenten was looking between her teammate and team leader, clearly conflicted about what was happening. Niji just sat there in silence with his eyes closed and arms crossed. Lee still would not be swayed, however. Gai-sensei would never allow such a thing. They can't be exterminated like rats just because someone has a problem with them. That would be overkill and would only cause pain and suffering. Lee spoke with a childish naivety that made Naruto want to send him straight back to Konoha, which he would have done if he didn't need the manpower provided by the green-wearing genin. Naruto thought about asking Lee what his sensei did during the wars Konoha was in, but that could destroy his mental state and make him dead weight, and once again he was needed for the mission. These orders come straight from the Hokage himself, and you as a genin have no right to question his judgment. However, if you do, then you will be put under house arrest for 3 months, and not even Gai-san will be able to get the punishment removed. My question is, are you willing to put your shinobi career on hold for a quarter of the year? Naruto then looked at the two quiet genin. Are any of you? Naruto knew he was being tough on them, but he was responsible for this mission and failure wasn't an option, especially his first as a chunin. If he was just another member, he wouldn't really care what Lee's viewpoint on the mission was. Naruto waited for an answer from each, and he didn't find it surprising that, after a minute of silence, that Niji was the first one to answer his question. I always knew that this was one of the requirements of being a shinobi. We were spoiled to go this far without taking a life. I will be ready, Uchiha-san. Niji was determined to become stronger than he was during the exams, and this was the first step to see if he was emotionally stronger. Naruto nodded, pleased with Niji's grasp on how this world really worked, unlike his teammate who was lost in the fantasies of the world. Naruto turned his attention to the kunoichi with hair done in buns. I will get the job done, Uchiha-san. Tenten spoke meekly, but Naruto could see that her eyes were slowly gaining resolve. Lee shot up from the log he was sitting on with his teammates, a scowl on his usually cheerful face. He looked at his teammates before looking at his squad leader with a furious shaking of his head. Lee spoke. I refuse to kill someone who has done nothing to wrong me or my friends. You two should be ashamed. Lee scolded his teammates before storming off into the woods and away from the camp. Lee, wait! Tenten shouted as she too got to her feet and chased after her upset teammate without even thinking about it. Naruto watched the two of his subordinates disappear into the forestry, content with letting Tenten deal with Lee. Naruto looked over at Niji with an arched eyebrow. Not going to follow them? Niji looked at the Uzumaki and shook his head with his eyes drifting to the light of the fire subconsciously. No, Lee is being childish. If it is for the leaf, then I will kill the Fuma clan without reservation. Tenten followed the sound of a loud but constant thumping, hoping to find her fuming teammate before he did something stupid. It only took the weapons user a minute to walk up behind her teammate as he was punching the trunk of one of the many trees. Tenten sat there for about 5 minutes until Lee's fury ran out of steam and he stopped assaulting the tree. Lee turned around and gave Tenten an apologetic smile, which she returned with a small but sad smile. Lee, you can't fight Naruto-san on this. It was orders from Hokage-sama himself. Tenten tried to reason with Lee but found no headway. Lee frowned deeply at the mention of having to kill once again, something he made sure not to do so far in his career. Lee didn't have a problem with Naruto at all, he just had a problem with the killing aspect of his mission. Tenten, I can't kill people who are innocent even if they are a clan of shinobi. How could I possibly face Gai-sensei after I was the cause of senseless bloodshed? Lee asked, conflicted, hoping Tenten could give him the answer in place of his mentor, who was not available. Sadly for the second green beast, Tenten did not have the answer. Tenten leaned against the tree that Lee was previously wailing on with a pained expression on her face while she looked down at the grass at her feet. What do you think that Gai-sensei did when he fought in the Third Shinobi War and in the times after that? Tenten asked seriously, looking at her teammate expectantly. Lee blinked once before shaking his head in denial at what his teammate was implying about their sensei. No, that is completely different, Tenten. Those were times of war, and that was Guy-sensei fighting to protect his comrades. All I would be doing is killing a group of people who want their freedom, Lee called out, passionately jumping to conclusions about why the Fuma clan was being hunted for. Tenten sighed sadly and pushed herself off of the tree she was resting against with a small frown painted on her face. Walking up to her teammate, the daughter of the blacksmith, placed her hands firmly on Lee's shoulders, getting him to look into her eyes. Lee, I don't want to do this either, but it is inevitable when one becomes a ninja. I hope you understand. Lee watched as the kunoichi of Team 9 left him and walked back towards the campsite as he tried to think of something to overcome this obstacle, just like all the others put in front of him. Sadly, for Lee, he knew this was not an obstacle he could defeat with his fists like he would normally do. Then an idea hit Lee, an idea he thought was absolutely brilliant and would give him a way out. That was deception. Okay, more than likely we will have to separate to deal with all of the clansmen, so I can use this to my advantage. I'll make sure to separate from Naruto-san, and then I will just knock them out with my taijutsu and go on to the next one. It is genius, Lee thought, happily nodding his head in agreement with his thoughts. Renewed with a new sense of drive, Lee launched himself at the tree he was formerly beating on and smashed through the trunk with a powerful flying kick. Sighing once more, Lee put on his usual chipper grin and made his way back to his team, ready to outfox the confines of the shinobi world. A large, luxurious dining room light up as row upon row of light clicked on, showering the room in the light bulb's glow. Sitting in the center, there was a mahogany table that stretched out to the set of gilded, double doors that allowed entrance into the room. Over the table was an elegant white tablecloth with an intricate trim around its edges. Dotted along the table were chairs set up in equal intervals, and in front of each chair was a plate accompanied by a set of pristine silverware. There was even an excellently crafted wine glass placed next to the plate, despite there not being any sort of drink to be poured. The windows that were built into the room were covered by drapes that clearly cost quite the lump sum and added to the bourgeoisie feeling that room seemed to exude in massive quantities. The sound of something clanging against glass echoed throughout the overly decorated dining room. There was a man sitting at the head of the table, the symbolism of which put him above the rest of his clan members, which was a giant ego boost. A constant stream of a red liquid washed into the once empty glass, filling it almost to the brim. There was a small hum as the glass was gripped from its underside before a pair of lips sampled the sweet-tasting liquor. There was a small hum as the owner of the voice evaluated the taste of what he was drinking. Finding the taste acceptable, he sent his maid away so that he could get down to business. The man in the chair was leaning back into the red cushions built into each chair with an amused, smug smirk as he looked over the hands folded in front of his face. The man's face had one long scar that ran from just under his eye down to his jaw, with a thick white mustache covering his upper lip. The man's hair was just as white as it fell past his ears on both sides and parted at the center, showing off the smooth, flawless skin of his forehead. To complete his look, the man was dressed in a royal purple leisure suit with a rose that was seemingly blooming out of his suit. "Ho, so it seems that I have pests from Kano, getting ready to snoop around my fine settlement?" The Fuma clan's leader spoke, clearly amused with the report he had just gotten from his guest. The man's voice was very high-pitched, and if not for the guest's emotional training, it would have easily annoyed him with just how high-strung it was. The Fuma patriarch's voice could easily be equated to a set of nails being slowly dragged across a chalkboard. If the man kneeling at the other end of the table, which was quite the ways away, felt any annoyance toward this man, his posture nor his voice did anything to give it away. The man who was the same who spoke to Danzo before he left. Toryun nodded his head. "Hi, Renzo-san." Releasing a small chuckle, the now identified Renzo let out a small, mirthful chuckle as he reached for his glass of wine. Brining the glass up to his mouth, the man with the white hair took another sip of the rich wine before regarding the rude operative. "It seems that my old friends back in Tsunade couldn't handle little old me, so they plan on bringing the big, bad hidden leaf down on my head in hopes of crushing me. How amusing!" The man broke out into laughter, not finding any threat in what could possibly happen to him despite the warnings from Toryun. When the man's hearty laughter finally came to an end, he seemed surprised to see that Toryun was still there, kneeling on the ground with a blank expression on his face. Tell Danzo that his dogs are not needed, and that I will take care of these shinobi myself, and not to show his face around here ever again. Renzo snarled at the root Nin, who simply nodded before he left the immediate area via the use of the shunshin. The white-haired man was so angry that he held his glass too tightly, which ended up with the glass shattering in his hand. The doors quickly opened, and the same maid from earlier came rushing in with another glass and refilled it with wine before handing it off to Renzo. Taking another sip to calm his fraying nerves, the clan leader looked to his maid, who stood at attention. I want you to go and gather my generals. It is time that we have a meeting and come up with a plan to deal with the leaf invaders who will show up soon. The maid uttered a quick yes before she hurried out of the room, leaving the man in the room by himself. The man looked into his reflection in the glass and gave himself a grin. Meanwhile, elsewhere Toryun was leaping from hanging tree limb to the next, his face void of any emotions, a product of his training. Toryun looked at the scroll in his hand before running his chakra through it, getting the scroll to explode, leaving no trace of its message. If the Uchiha doesn't kill you, then we will Fuma. You know too much about us, even if it was only things that Danzo-sama allowed. Toryun thought to himself emotionlessly as he continued to make his way back to one of the many root bases where he would give his report to Danzo and wait for further orders. There was one thing for certain, and that was the Fuma clan would not live past the end of the next day or two. For figures stood side by side as they looked down on the Fuma settlement from the top of the cliff they came upon. The four figures were Naruto and Team 9, each had a small frown on their face when they gazed upon the very quiet settlement. Naruto and Neji, who had their Sharingan and Byakugan bloodlines activated respectively, used their improved vision to see that there were a number of Fuma walking along the street in every direction. Each person had different feelings, knowing that each life down there needed to be ended for the sake of their mission. Naruto, who had already taken a life, was used to this, so this fact was not so jarring to the Uzumaki clan head. Naruto's strategic mind had already sectioned off the Fuma settlement into 5 sections, so it would be easier to issue orders off to his genin. In one of the far corners of the settlement there appeared to be a series of agricultural fields. Then under them seemed to be rows of housing. Then to the east there was a rather large tower jutting out over the other buildings. In the center of the area was what appeared to be a bazaar, if the amount of traffic it was getting was any indication. Then to the north Naruto could make out what appeared to be a warehouse and noted that could be where they stored equipment. Naruto's 3 Tomo Sharingan turned to regard the Hyuga, who caught his gaze and looked back at Naruto. Naruto, seeing he had the branch Hyuga's attention, turned his gaze back to the small settlement, getting the Hyuga to do the same. Neji, you are to take to bazaar in the center of the village. Use whatever means you think to be necessary, but make sure that you get the job done. Neji closed his eyes, and after a moment he reopened them and gave his team leader an affirmative nod. Neji decided to wait to get into action until Naruto gave out the other orders. Naruto turned to face the kunoichi of the team, who was standing next to him and looking down at the village, doing her best to keep up a neutral face. Though her emotions were given away by the slight tremble in her hand, telling Naruto all she was feeling. He assumed that she would get over any remaining reservations, because if not, her growth as a kunoichi would be stunted. Tenten, you will be entrusted to deal with the easternmost area where that tower is springing out of the ground. Naruto saw her nod but stay her ground, just like Neji had, but made no move to comment on that choice. Lee, you will be handling the section right below us, and I fully expect you to carry out your duties as a shinobi of Konoha or else. Naruto spoke flatly, looking at Lee, who didn't seem to be paying attention to him as he left the threat from earlier hanging, and to be honest, Naruto didn't really care if he took heed of his words. Tenten, who was closest to Lee, looked over at her fuzzy-browed teammate to see if she could find if he made any form of decision, but found nothing and sighed under her breath. She could only hope that her teammate would make the correct decision. Naruto's blood-red Sharingan spun idly as he looked over the destination of his mission, stoically remembering to keep his emotions bottled up until the appropriate time, as he was taught to do by Itachi. A cool breeze blew through the area, moving Naruto's hanging bang, showing off his second cursed eye. I will handle the 2 areas that I did not mention. When you have completed your assignments, I want you to return here and await my return. With that, Naruto disappeared in a leaf shunshin, leaving Team Guy standing there on their own before Neji took his leave, followed by Tenten and finally Lee. Neji dropped down off one of the roofs that he was watching the Fuma wander around the bazaar like they would on any normal day. Of course, Neji's sudden appearance caught the attention of some of the more globally aware Fuma, who heightened their senses, when they saw the white eyes that marked Niji as a Hyuga. Niji's eyes filtered from left to right, counting the number of people that were ready to fight, and came to a conclusion that there were at least 20 combat-trained people while the rest looked to be civilian. It's time to find out if I am ready to get stronger. One of the males that knew who Niji was from his definable traits looked at the leaf headband that was tied around Niji's head and sneered. It was his hatred of the world-renowned hidden leaf that fueled his hate-filled speech. What is one of the hidden leaf's dogs doing here in Fuma territory? A Hyuga, no less? Niji's eyes narrowed distastefully when the Fuma referred to him as a dog, something that his pride couldn't take laying down. The field of vision granted to him by the Byakugan allowed Niji to see that other possible shinobi who were in the area had begun to surround him. Despite that, Niji kept his cool, something he learned that could be his undoing the hard way during the last exams. What my business here is no concern of yours, cur. Niji retorted coolly as he dropped into the Hyuga's taijutsu stance with a deep frown etched upon his face. Of course, the man growled like a cur when Niji called him such, as Niji hoped. The man, whose hair was black and otherwise held really no other eye-catching characteristics, laughed a dark laugh. His hand reached behind him and pulled out the large shuriken that the Fuma were known for. Hear that, boys? The little Hyuga thinks that things that happen in our home don't concern us? Let's get him ready for his body bag. The Fuma shouted out, thinking that Niji was a fool for letting himself be surrounded like he was currently. There was a small, affirmative shout from every direction before he let his enlarged shuriken fly towards the Hyuga invader. Niji watched as the large, death-dealing star came whizzing through the air, aimed towards him. With the same thing happening all around him, Niji closed his eyes. Just before the Fuma could cheer for their easily won victory over Niji, the prodigy begun to spin, while emitting chakra from every tenketsu on his body, resulting in a dome of spinning chakra to roar forth. Rotation! Niji called out under his breath as the large ninja tools deflected off of his dome of spinning chakra, only to be redirected back at his opponents. Slowly, Niji came to a graceful stop and surveyed just how much damage that he had done. Looking around, the branch Hyuga could see that only 3 of the weapons thrown at him were embedded into his opponents. Indirect kills, while others flew through windows or were stuck in the ground and buildings. Niji smirked when he could see the Fuma, who was doing all of the talking earlier, grit his teeth in anger, and he mentally basked in the feeling of making someone so irritated they acted out visibly on it, something that he was usually on the receiving end of. From behind, Niji could see a small spike in one of the Fuma's chakra reserves thanks to his Byakugan, and readied himself for anything. Wind release, pressurized air cannon. The air in front of the man's hands became visible and formed into the shape of a sphere that was launched directly at Niji's unguarded back. The man who fired the wind nature jutsu at Niji smirked when he heard the sickening crack of what he assumed was Niji's skeletal structure. That smirk quickly faded when he saw that the only thing there was a bunch of splintered wood from Niji's substitution. The man looked around for wherever Niji was sure to reappear, hoping that he could finish off the Hyuga whelp by his own hand. The man suddenly whirled around and brought the bladed side of his kunai with him, and the former smirk came back full force. The reason for that was because the metal of his kunai found itself going through the neck of the Hyuga, yet instead of blood splashing onto his face, the kunai went clean through the body of Niji. The man's eyes widened and frantically searched the area for the real Hyuga, and not the simple bunshin in front of him. The Fuma member stopped dead when he felt someone directly behind him. That person was the object of his search, the Hyuga, who was glaring at the back of the man's cranium. I believe that you were looking for me? Well, here I am. Niji murmured coldly, his Byakugan leering distastefully at the Fuma, who had the nerve to try and slander his noble heritage. Niji struck the man at the base of his neck and watched on remorselessly as he crumbled to the ground at his feet. I am glad that I took the time to relearn the substitution and bunshin jutsu, because they are so easy to perform thanks to the chakra control granted to me thanks to the gentle fist style. When the hidden leaf genin heard an enraged cry, he snapped back to reality and saw there was someone rushing at him recklessly. I kill you for that leaf trash. The man cried out as rage continued to guide him directly at Niji, who looked the least bit concerned by the rash action. Niji easily maneuvered under the sloppy attack and begun to lash out with the 8 trigrams 64 palms. The man's body lurched forward as Niji continuously struck at various points in the man's bodies. When Niji was ready to end the technique, he caught a traveling blast of wind aimed at him while he was in mid-motion. Knowing there was no fully avoiding the technique, Niji shifted his body so that it clipped his shoulder and forced him back. When Niji finally came to stop, he looked up to see the smug looks on the faces of his opponents and let go of his injured shoulder so he could fight freely. Niji scanned over every person and knew that he had to finish things fast before their numbers advantage became too daunting for him to overcome. Lowering himself into a readied position, Niji steeled himself as his opponents began to laugh at him. It is time to see just how far I have come since the end of the exams. It is time to see if I am strong enough to kill another man. The genin in the green jumpsuit ran down the street, ignoring all of the civilians who were running away from him in terror. The reason being he had already launched one Fuma through the wall of one of the houses, rendering him unconscious after only one kick. That was something that left Lee very disappointed because even if he was skirting around the mission parameters, he was still hoping he could find a good fight. However, the fuzzy-browed genin found that much like his kunoichi teammate, the Fuma relied upon ninja tools and had neglected their taijutsu. Ducking under a feebly thrown Fuma shuriken, Lee raced towards the man who threw it and knocked him into a wall with a powerful kick aimed at his torso. Once he heard the man's pained groan, Lee sprinted down the row of homes with a look of pure determination. There is no need for these people to die. I can just knock them unconscious, then report to Naruto that they have been killed. I know that Gai-sensei says that lying is unyouthful, but I need to do this so these people can continue to live with their loved ones for as long as Kami-sama sees fit. There was a glimpse that had Lee freeze in his tracks, something that saved him from getting his arm cleaved off by the sword that descended down on the spot a few steps ahead. Lee looked up to see a taller man with a balding head grinning down at the boy with the thick eyebrows. Lee launched off from his kneeled position, making sure to be careful of the sword that was being swung at him. Much to Lee's surprise, the larger man moved just as quickly as he did and had his sword poised to strike. Acting quickly, the genin hit the butt of the sword with his elbow, stopping the sword's forward momentum, giving him enough time to leap back and to safety. To find someone as large as you that can move as fast as you do is truly a youthful surprise. I must train my body just as hard as you do, my large friend. Lee pledged happily as he looked at the man intensely, getting the much larger man to release a large, booming laughter. Lee stood there patiently waiting for the man to stop laughing so they could continue their fierce battle. Once the man finally stopped laughing, he took his sword off of his shoulder and pointed it directly at the fuzzy-browed shinobi with an amused smirk in play. You are one weird kid, you know that, right? Well, that doesn't really matter anyways since you are snooping around my home. Around here we kill your kind, so say hello to the Shinigami for me, kid. The man spoke confidentially, his sword randomly cutting the air as he pointed up and down Lee's body as he spoke. Though his words were pretty laid back, Lee still found himself to be frowning because yet again here was a man who had no problems killing another person. The man thought it was the insults that caused Lee to frown and started to laugh again, ignoring Lee, or so it seemed. This time, instead of doing nothing, the disciple of Madogai crouched down and slowly pulled up the orange leg warmers that were around his shins. The swordsman stopped laughing when he saw that Lee was unhooking old-fashioned training weights and cocked an eyebrow, clearly curious. Lee stood up with his eyes closed and his arms stretched out, with his hands holding the weights like a pair of scales. What does he think a few weights are going to do for him? They can't weigh that much. The kid looks like a shrimp. The Fuma swordsman thought to himself, skepticism surrounding the Kanahegakure genin. As soon as Lee opened up his eyes and he dropped the weights, allowing them to crash into the ground, leaving two small craters on either side of the shinobi. The swordsman stumbled back a step out of surprise. What the hell? What on earth does this kid do for training? Regaining his composure, the man wrapped his hands around the hilt of his sword and regarded Lee as a serious threat. Despite the goofy vibe that Lee gave off, he could see just how his opponent's demeanor had shifted over the past minute and knew it was too late. Let's go, Lee whispered quietly as he shot forward, vanishing from the sight of the swordsman, getting the balding Fuma to look around, a sense of dread growing in his gut. The man's eyes widened when he saw Lee reappear right in front of him, but before he was able to react to Lee's appearance, the taijutsu specialist had already thrown him in the air with a strong, rising kick. The man opened his eyes after shutting them briefly due to all of the pan and found he couldn't find Lee. That was because Lee was behind him, mimicking his body's positioning perfectly like a shadow. The swordsman tried to move so he could catch sight up Lee, but found that his body was bound up by the hand wraps rolled around his fists and forearms. The man knew it was too late when he felt two hands gripping his arms tightly through the wrappings. He did the only thing he could. He screamed as he and Lee's bodies begun to spin violently. The Fuma closed his eyes as his equilibrium was thrown off due to the spinning, as he and Lee came closer to crashing into unforgiving ground below. Of course, Lee broke off just before his front lotus was over, leaving his opponent to be spiked into the ground. Lee stood there for a few moments, satisfied with the results of his taijutsu maneuver, before a chilling realization came over him. The realization that the front lotus might have killed the man, something he vowed not to do. Hurrying over to the man, Lee put his fingers down on his neck to check for a pulse and sighed heavily when he felt the pulse of his former opponent, glad that he was still drawing breath. Standing up, Lee started to rewrap his hands with a smile, looking at all of the unconscious people, glad he was able to keep his word thus far. Yet he knew the job was not done. Tenten was panting slightly as she tried to regain her breath after a rather large conflict between she and an unhappy group of Fuma. The daughter of the blacksmith took this time to wonder if her teammates were having just as rough of a go as she was. The weapons user looked up at the tower looming overhead and released a very unladylike snort, not quite believing there was still more. If one was to look around, they would be able to see a number of corpses with kunai, shuriken, and a number of random weapons embedded into the bodies stewed about. Tenten had managed to push down all of the conflicting emotions that came with the work that shinobi were forced to do until there was time for her to deal with it appropriately. Luckily for the hidden leaf kunoichi, her first kill was a man who was by himself, so when she froze up afterwards, there was no one there to take advantage of her immobility. After that, she found that she didn't have any problems killing again, well aside from the Fuma's resistance, of course. Tenten cursed Naruto weakly for giving her such a difficult sector, ignoring the fact that Naruto had taken 2 sectors personally. She just needed something to complain about. Taking a few steps ahead, she let her thoughts wander towards the resident taijutsu specialist on her team and how he would act on this mission. She knew that he was a kind guy and valued life, but this was something that would come eventually. That was something her father made sure to point out to her before she started her kunoichi training, thinking that she would need to know all that came with being a shinobi to a hidden village. The girl shook her head because it was clear that no one had done that for Lee and left him in the compromising situation that he was in currently. All right, time to finish this horrible mission and get back home and take a nice, long bath. Tenten spoke loudly, hoping to encourage herself to push on, as she smacked her cheeks lightly, getting a healthy flush to adorn them. Checking to make sure her scrolls were secured to her person tightly, Tenten made her way towards the large tower with purpose showing in each stride. As she looked up at the impressive structure, she wondered why she never learnt any techniques made to make her stealthier, which would have helped greatly. Now then, how do I want to go about doing this? While the hidden leaf kunoichi was busy mumbling to herself, there were 2 pairs of eyes watching her. One with curiosity and the other in amusement. After a few more moments of watching the girl, one of the figures cleared their throat, hoping to snap Tenten out of her self-induced reprieve. The sound of a feminine voice caught the attention of the girl's ears, earning the desired action of her eyes, snapping over to where the 2 figures were standing. Being as startled as she was, Tenten immediately reached for her weapons scroll before she took note of each figure's appearance. The figure standing on the left was grinning at her for a reason that was currently out of Tenten's comprehension. Her hair was cut short, probably out of choice, and was a very light shade of brown. The woman's eyes were an equally bright shade of brown and were currently twinkling with mirth. Tenten saw that the woman was gripping what appeared to be a hand axe in her left hand, which the girl with buns in her hair thought was an odd choice for a weapon. Not that she would comment on that. Her clothing consisted of a black, padded jacket and black shinobi pants, along with standard shinobi sandals. Tenten looked over to the second figure, who was also a woman, but the difference in their demeanors was as clear as night and day. Whereas the first kunoichi looked relaxed, this one was much stiffer and looked at Tenten with a dry stare that could easily be mistaken for a glare if one looked at her too quickly. The woman's silver hair was long in comparison to her counterpart, and some of the silver strands covered up one of the coal-black eyes she possessed. She too was dressed in the same black jacket and pants, but she did differ in choice of weapon. This woman had 1 tanto in each of her hands and was clearly ready to assault the Kanehigakure kunoichi with them. A cloud of smoke erupted from around Tenten's hands, and a few moments later the cloud dispersed, revealing that Tenten was holding a chain with a scythe blade at one end and a weight at the other, making the weapon easier to throw if the need arose. Tenten narrowed her eyes at the 2 threats across from her before speaking. "What do you 2 think you are doing, sneaking up on me like that?" Tenten's voice came out harsh and accusatory, much to the amusement of half of the duo, while the other looked miffed by the girl's blatant accusation. "Oi! Did you hear that, Luza-chan? She thinks we were trying to sneak up on her. The brown-haired girl asked of the silver-haired one, using her free hand to hold her side as she giggled uncontrollably, making Tenten taking a step back. Sure, she was used to dealing with weird from Lee and Guy, but this was another case of weird. The silver-haired Luza did not dignify the bubbly axe wielder with a response, immediately confusing Tenten, but eventually the woman's head slowly turned to face the brown-haired Kunoichi next to her. I told you not to call me that. Ever, Rin. Luza hissed in annoyance, though her face didn't show she was annoyed. Luza turned her attention away from Rin, who was currently pouting, childishly muttering about grouchy partners, so she could look at Tenten, who tensed slightly at being the center of attention. And to answer your question, we did not sneak up on you. You came walking up here without paying attention, but this makes it easier to find you leaf invaders. Luza spoke calmly, her tantos armed and ready to do bodily harm. With how calm the silver-haired Kunoichi was speaking, it was hard for Tenten to tell if she was just pointing out a fact or chastising her for her lack of focus. That was when the bun-haired Kunoichi realized what she said at the end. Why, you knew that we were coming? That shouldn't have been possible. Tenten momentarily entertained the thought of trying to flee, but figured the two would only chase her down. You should not concern yourself with how your plans were known. You should concern yourself with how you will survive this encounter. Luza advised Tenten with an even cooler voice than before as water started to cling to one of her tanto blades, while in the other hand chakra created lightning had come surging through the other blade. Shit, she can use 2 different types of elemental chakra to augment the strength of her blades, and the elements work well together. Then I have to go for the other one. Tenten thought angrily as she kissed her teeth, her eyes quickly flowing towards Rin, who was smiling benevolently at her. Grabbing the weight, Tenten sent the weight soaring towards the face of the brown-haired enemy Kunoichi. Rin just smiled wider and brought the flat side of her axe up just as the weight was about to hit her. Crack. Tenten's smirk quickly faded when she saw the cracks start to spread throughout the weight she had tossed at the Kunoichi. She gasped slightly when she saw her weight fall apart before she looked at Rin's axe and how it was left without scoff or scratch. She yanked back on the dangling chain as hard as she could to retrieve her weapon's tether as soon as possible and away from the enemy. What the hell is going on here? Tenten asked, more to herself than to her opponents. Rin, who had heard her opponent's shocked mumbling, was all too happy to provide the lost Kunoichi an answer. Hee hee. Well, you see, Panda-chan, Luza-chan isn't the only one who knows how to use her chakra to enhance her weapons. Rin chirped happily, missing the glare directed at her from Tenten, who clearly wasn't happy about that panda remark. Ignoring the ire rolling off of her opponent, the laid-back Kunoichi brought her axe up into the air just in front of her face with a very mischievous grin in play. Here, let me show you, Panda-chan. Earth release. Subterrane slash. Rin cried out cheerily, bringing her axe down, swiftly burying the darkened steel of her axe into the ground. Tenten watched on, underwhelmed, as a slight bulge under the ground traveled towards her at a fast enough pace. Just before Tenten was able to speak, she caught an adequately sized rock get cut clean through, and she leapt to the left and out of the path from the attack as fast as she could. The Konoha Kunoichi turned to look back as the attack hit the building behind her, and the results floored the previously skeptical girl. The moment the trail under the earth hit the building was split in 2 congruent halves with a shuddering crash that made Tenten cringe slightly. The ground around the building collapsed on itself, allowing the 2 halves to fall in on itself, kicking up a plume of dust. The Team 9 Kunoichi could feel a cold sweat making its presence known on the side of her face. What kind of monster is this girl? Tenten asked mentally, not even thinking that it could be she was just too weak in comparison to this unknown Kunoichi. Rin watched her own technique completely demolish the building with an owlish expression on her face, with a small sweat drop growing on the back of her head, which got bigger when the 2 halves collapsed. Looking at Tenten, who was still gaping like a fish, she giggled nervously. Oofs? Yeah, that old Scarface is going to have a cow about that later. Luza sighed before she vanished from within a water shunshin, appearing next to the still shocked Tenten. Acting quickly, Luza speared the tip of her lightning-infused tanto within the chain links of Tenten's weapon, sending a debilitating amount of voltage straight into the girl's body. We can deal with that later, let's just go and deliver the girl already and be done with this whole thing. Naruto stood there under the shade of a tree, his Sharingan taking in the sight before him with no real emotion showing over the other. He was right about these fields being agriculturally based because currently he was watching the elderly, women, and children tend to the crops they needed to sustain themselves. Naruto watched as one child ran over to his mother and showed her a rather large crop that he had picked and had to fight the smile that was coming to his face. It might have been a shock to others if they saw him smiling, but he knew there were still a number of things that could bring a warmth to his heart. Perhaps there is a way to do this without killing these people specifically. A quick genjutsu will knock them out and then I can move out of range before I finish the mission. And if this is done right, then Konoha won't have to deal with the backlash of revenge if they so choose to do so. Naruto thought to himself, trying to come up with his decision before he acted because he would not act decisively. That was why he was taking this time to watch the blissfully unaware people continuing to go about their day without a care of the threats of the world around them. Naruto looked to his left when he felt a lightweight perch on top of his shoulder and was slightly surprised to see Suisei looking back at him with her own Sharingan. The two cursed eyes practitioners were left in an amiable silence, one staring into the other's red eyes. "What are you doing here, Suisei?" Naruto asked through the soul link, choosing not to speak on the off chance one of the people before him overheard anything he would say. Naruto could just feel the dry stare that Suisei was leveling him with and wondered just how he should brush it off while maintaining his image. Suisei would have laughed at Naruto if it were not for the people that he seemed to be watching. "Like, I would listen to you, we are partners, and I am not going to sit back at home while you head out into the world. But enough of that. It seems that big, bad Naruto-kun is getting soft, huh?" Naruto rolled his eyes with a soft groan since he was getting that a lot from those who were close to him, and what made it worse was Suisei could get into his thoughts. Looking away from Suisei and back to the people working out in the fields, Naruto gave his answer. "Just because I have distaste for senseless slaughter doesn't make me soft. I am no bloodthirsty maniac." Suisei nodded her head, already knowing what kind of person her partner was after spending so much time with him, and she was glad that he was the way he was, though she did have a strong distaste for his past. "Then, if you are going to spare these people, what will you say to the idiots back at the Leaf? Who says that they need to find out?" That was Naruto's simple answer to the question posed to him, knowing full well Suisei was speaking of the top brass of Konoha, and in truth Naruto could care less what they would say to him if they found out, which they wouldn't. "I guess they don't. Alright then. How are you going to do this then, because there is quite the number of bodies here?" Suisei asked curiously, since Naruto seemed to be taking in every repetitious movement the workers were going through. Naruto's lips twitched upward as he turned to look at Suisei, who had her head cocked to the side in an act of curiosity. "Not I, we Suisei. It's time to see how far you can go with that Sharingan of yours after all this time," Naruto thought with a grin as he watched the crow's eyes widen in surprise, probably thinking he was going to go solo. "Now these are simple civilians, so all you are going to need is a simple knockout genjutsu which will do the job nicely." Suisei was sure that her happiness was just overflowing through the bond that she and Naruto shared. The reason for that happiness being that Naruto trusted her to do something like this in an uncontrolled environment. "I won't let you down, Naruto-kun," Suisei chirped as she took off like a bullet to go do as her partner asked. Naruto smiled at her enthusiasm and disappeared in a small twister of black feathers, his shunshin. Naruto reappeared in front of an elderly man who was looking down at the ground, missing Naruto's appearing out of thin air. Naruto cleared his throat, getting the elderly man to look up into his Sharingan that was spinning around hypnotically, and before the man could speak, Naruto beat him to the punch. Sharingan Genjutsu. Sleep. With the ocular contact, Naruto was easily able to control the man's chakra and put him into a forced slumber. Before the elderly man could fall to the ground, Naruto created a shadow clone and had it bring the man somewhere safe. Naruto glanced around and saw how many people were left and mumbled to himself. "This might take a little more chakra than I would like to admit, but this is the way that I have chosen and there is no going back. I'll just need to rush the warehouse job with a few fire jutsu and move on." Naruto mused, looking up into the sky, watching the clouds drift about in the sky lazily before Naruto turned his gaze to another person who was looking towards him, and in that moment Naruto had caught another person within his hypnotic gaze. "Then again, if things move about like this, maybe things won't take as long as I thought." Naruto pondered to himself, watching as Suisei landed on a woman's shoulders, getting her to look into the crow's eyes, sealing her fate for the next few hours. Shaking his head, Naruto went back to the task at hand, finishing the mission. A violent twister of wind and black feathers roared to life on the cliff that the team from the Leaf had taken refuge on earlier, and when the wind settled Naruto was revealed to Neji and Lee, who were talking amongst each other. Naruto's sharp eyes immediately noticed that Tenten was missing from the gathering, and his eyes narrowed at the two shinobi. Somewhere in his gut, the Hokage's son felt that something was amiss and that Tenten wasn't simply running late. Naruto could see that the other two shinobi felt the same, seeing the expressions of worry being reflected on their faces. Tenten was not with you, Naruto-san? Neji asked, even though both he and Naruto knew it was more of a confirmation than a question. Naruto looked over to the Hyuga and after a moment nodded slightly, earning a frown from the Hyuga prodigy. Naruto bit back the groan of annoyance that desperately wanted to escape from the confines of his throat. Before Naruto could even say anything on the subject, the taijutsu specialist interjected himself into the discussion. I will go and save Tenten from these unyouthful Fuma. Lee shouted, the passion of his mentor slowly festering and taking over his body, but just as he was about to leap off of the cliff, Naruto's voice stopped him. No, you will not. I am not taking any risks here, so I will be cleaning this mess up and bringing back Tenten on my own. And if you cannot accept that, then we can settle this now, but know that the time we spend doing so can cost your teammate her life. Naruto spoke sternly to both of his subordinates, but everyone knew that his words were directed towards the fuzzy-browed genin. Lee grit his teeth and clenched his fists as he stared down Naruto, who didn't so much as bat an eyelash at Lee and his glare. Naruto would not give any ground on this issue and needed to see if Lee would challenge him on this before he left. Neji, who was not sure what Lee would do but wanted to save Tenten as quickly as possible, stepped in before the hole that was being dug got any deeper. Standing between the two people, Neji turned to face Naruto, hoping to shield Lee from Naruto's eyes. No. There are no arguments here, please save Tenten. Naruto nodded slowly and once again vanished within the eye of a black feather tornado, leaving a relived Neji and Lee, who was concerned for his teammate. Naruto walked out of the shadows of the building near the large tower, taking note that Tenten had indeed followed his orders and killed the Fuma in the settlement, something he figured she might have skirted around. Naruto paused for a moment to conceal his presence as much as an amateur Jinchuriki could. And admitting he was indeed an amateur hurt both his and the Kyuubi's pride, but it was the truth. It would be difficult training, but it would be necessary for him to reach his utmost potential, and anything less would not be acceptable, especially considering just how powerful the other Jinchuriki were. Standing at the base of the ornate tower, Naruto decided to take care of this little problem right now and not later. Going through a quick series of hand signs, Naruto held two of his fingers to his lips as his chakra flew up his throat. Fire release. Grand Fireball. Naruto, knowing how to alter the technique, held his fingers in place, creating a flamethrower that torched the building, setting it ablaze. Upon ending his jutsu, Naruto listened to the panicked screams and cries for help from the inside and knew he grabbed their attention. Naruto was ready to walk into the flaming tower, but his eyes caught something off the glass of one of the windows. Naruto's Sharingan picked up the reflection of a projectile flying towards him from behind and acted on instinct, grabbing twilight and pushing his chakra into the katana. Not a moment too late. A violet chakra lightning surged through the blade, allowing Naruto to easily cut through the earth bullet. Naruto mentally thanked Mikoto for tutoring him in the lightning release. Naruto turned around, glaring at the two people who just landed on the ground in front of him for their attempt on his life. Naruto kept his chakra up, creating the lightning, and was about to attack, but one of the figures spoke first. "Oi, that wasn't nice, Mr. Red Eyes," was the feminine and slightly annoyed shout directed at Naruto from Rin, who was pointing at Naruto like he had just robbed a treasury. Naruto stared at the girl, who he didn't know, with an arched eyebrow as he wondered if she was serious or not. When the glare got even worse, he decided that she was indeed serious about the whole thing. Since Naruto sure as hell wasn't going to apologize for his will to live, he decided to return the girl's banter with his own little twist to it. "Well, neither is trying to squash me like a bug under a rock," Naruto fired back while trying to figure out how to end this as quickly as possible. He already ruled out genjutsu, seeing as there were two of them. As soon as those words had gotten to the ears of Rin, her irritation quickly gave way to an insanely bright smile that made Naruto wonder how her cheeks split that far. "I like this guy. Hey Luza-chan, is it alright if I fight Mr. Red Eyes?" Rin asked excitedly as she looked over to Luza, who was staring at Naruto intently. "I remember your face." The silver-haired Kunoichi began getting Naruto to cock the eyebrow hidden by his bang. "Yes, you are the shinobi who defeated the Ichibi's Jinchuriki and the Ichibi itself. Naruto Uzumaki Uchiha. Luza spoke, seriously doubting her and Rin's chances of defeating the Sharingan-wielding Leaf Nin. Luza dismissing the intrigued look on Naruto's face, turning to address her partner. You can fight him if you want, but I will not be fighting him yet. Luza spoke calmly, keeping the last word in her mind. If you do fight him, Rin, try not to die. Luza warned Rin before turning back to Naruto, who was watching the whole thing play out silently. We will meet again, Uchiha-san. And with that, Luza took off in the opposite direction, knowing that their employer was soon to be dead. I knew Luza-chan cared about me. Rin cheered happily, with an even brighter smile lighting up her face. Quickly turning around, Rin shot Naruto that same smile with her hands folded against the small of her back. Sorry, but I have to go and follow Luza-chan. See ya around, Uzumaki-kun. Naruto watched the odd girl take off in a hurry after the silver-haired Kunoichi, and shook his head, placing Twilight back on his hip. Naruto turned back to the tower just in time to see a man running past, or trying to at least, before Naruto took him by the collar of his shirt, bringing him into forced eye contact. Tell me who your leader is and where he is. Naruto demanded, using his Sharingan to make the man bow to his will, whether the man wanted to or not. Naruto watched on as the light faded from the man's green eyes and his voice dropped into an empty tone. His name is Renzo-sama, and he is currently at the top floor of the tower. The man's in-tone voice gave Naruto the answer he was searching for, getting Naruto to smile at the success of his Sharingan's Genjutsu. Letting the man crumble to the ground, unconscious, Naruto took into the flaming tower to save his subordinate. Naruto immediately ran to the top floor, sticking to the roof to avoid the chaos on the floors. Reaching the top floor in a flurry, Naruto sighed, since he knew this would look dramatic and hence go against what a shinobi was, but it was necessary for this moment. As soon as Naruto took 2 steps into the room, he was greeted by Renzo, who was smirking at him mockingly, as if he was in control, as if he had everything completely planned out. Naruto did not like that look, considering there was a burning tower literally going up in flames around him. Look at the little leaf pest coming right into the web I set up for you. Ever since the beginning. Renzo gloated slyly, or at least what he thought was being sly, but Naruto had easily picked up on what he was hinting at, and the implications made Naruto's blood boil. There was a traitor somewhere in his village that needed to be driven out, but first he needed to save Tenten, who was tied in a chair off to the left. Naruto's eyes darted from the unconscious Kunoichi to the smug man who was sweating lightly from intense heat of Naruto's flames. How did you know we were coming, Renzo? Naruto hissed out angrily, watching the man simply laugh off his questioning. Seeing the man was not giving him anything, the raven-haired boy looked back at Tenten, hoping to save her now before anything could escalate and put the Kunoichi in even greater danger. He really hoped to find something regarding the traitor, but it seemed it wasn't meant to be. Just when Naruto was ready to make his move towards Tenten, Renzo spoke up. Hey, Leaf Brat. Look into my eyes when I am about to destroy you, and know that you are helpless. Know that anything you do is futile against me. Look at me. I want to see the despair in those eyes of yours. Renzo cried out, passionately staring into Naruto's eyes, who was baffled by this man's idiocy. Naruto wondered if the man even knew of the Sharingan's capabilities to make such a challenge. In the end, the hidden Leaf Chunin accepted the challenge and locked gazes with the well-dressed Fuma, sealing his fate. With the fool under his control, Naruto used his optical abilities to try and fish through his mind for the information he desired, but before he could, he was forcibly ejected from the incapacitated man's mind. Naruto, in his surprise, let his Sharingan fade back into his azure pools as he watched the man fall to his knees and let out a shrill cry of pain. Renzo's hands flew up and gripped the sides of his head, screaming for the pain to stop. Naruto watched on in morbid fascination as the man's eyes rolled back into his head, and he fell to the floor of the tower dead. Not sparing the dead man a second glance, Naruto cut Tenten free, picked her up bridal style, and body flickered away from the towering inferno and back to meet up with Neji and Lee. As soon as Naruto reappeared holding a knocked-out Tenten, Neji and Lee rushed forth, asking Naruto what happened to her, which he responded with the true answer, that he did not know. After a number of times asking the same question, both shinobi accepted the answer, Neji more so than Lee. Naruto, remembering his final objective, walked over to Lee and presented him with his unconscious teammate. Here, I don't believe there is any lasting damage, so she should be up within the hour. Naruto informed the taijutsu specialist as he handed over Tenten to him, getting a nod from the genin. Rolling his shoulders, Naruto turned around and created a Kage Bunshin that stood next to him at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the clouds of smoke that elevated into the air from the burning buildings that Naruto had created. Both Neji and Lee looked at Naruto, wondering what he was doing, since they believed the mission was finally over but kept their mouths closed. Naruto and his clone shared a look as Naruto slowly built of a sphere of condensed wind between his palms. Eventually, the sphere became too much for Naruto to hold and floated into the airspace in front of him and continued to grow in size. Neji and Lee, who recognized the technique from back in the Chunin exams, immediately backed away from Naruto, who was watching the sphere grow before his clone hit the sphere with a fireball fusing the two elemental energies. Seeing that the stage was set, the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki put his pointer fingers together and aimed them at the sphere of air and flames. A small spark of lightning shot from his fingertips and merged into the ball of swirling winds and roaring flames. Now that his technique was complete, Naruto had the winds themselves carry the massive bomb into the center of the settlement. Collaboration technique. Judgment of the Scorned. Naruto's whisper was cancelled out by the crash of energy that was unleashed when Naruto's attack hit the earth, releasing all the energy that was packed into the sphere. Turning around, Naruto walked towards his team as a massive wave of energy shot up and domed out as the energy searched for an escape, leaving Neji impressed despite already seeing the move. Lee, on the other hand, was scowling furiously at what had just occurred. All of the effort Lee put in leaving people unconscious was gone, along with all the lives Naruto had so easily taken away. It was then that Lee decided that Naruto was not someone he neither liked nor respected. Naruto walked past his two motionless subordinates, oblivious to their thoughts, and kept walking until he realized there was no one following him. "Let's go," Naruto ordered, getting the other Leaf Shinobi to come back to reality. Neji nodded and did so while Lee casted a lingering glance where the Fuma were located before following, carrying Tenten at a safe distance from his team leader. The only thing left of the once proud Fuma clan was nothing but the smoldering crater left by Naruto's last technique, and the survivors that Naruto allowed to continue living on, saving them from an obscure death in a crater. Root hidden base. Danzo slowly opened up one eye to look down at a shinobi who was kneeling at the man's feet with a bored stare. The man could hear his master's cane tapping the ground, but he would not dare to meet his superior's gaze without being addressed first. Danzo broke his pensive silence after a few moments of deep thought. "Toryun, the Fuma are no more and have more than likely been killed by Naruto Uchiha. This means that you are free until I have another mission for you to partake." Toryun didn't answer. He simply vanished from the darkness of the base to go about his normal duties, since Danzo would be aware if the seal placed on Renzo was destroyed. Getting out of his throne, Danzo stood up slowly and made his way back to the room carved out for him, each and every move stiff. Danzo slammed his door shut, the echo of the action traveling down the stone halls without interference. Once he was in his room, Danzo leaned his cane against the wall next to his door. Danzo strolled past his bed and walked up to a large stand-up dresser that his hands rested upon. Fingers wrapping around the handles on each door, Danzo took a small breath before pulling open both doors simultaneously, causing a small breeze to ruffle his robes. There, hanging in the back of the dresser, was an exact replica of the Hokage's robes and hat, with the only difference being that instead of a vibrant red, the color there was a dark crimson, a shade that fit Danzo much better than a bright color. This outfit, sitting in the shadows of his room, was much like Danzo, who was sitting in the shadows of the Hokage, waiting for the right time to come into the light. It was clear that the decades had failed to dull the old Shimura's ambition to sit at the top of the village, hidden in the leaves. Letting a brief scowl to play on his lips as memories of his past failures, Danzo shut the dresser, hiding the robes away once more. Walking to the bed without a limp, Danzo eased his way into his bed, his thoughts shifting from the position of Hokage to the Uzumaki clan head, who had unknowingly foiled his plan. "You were able to get away clean this time, and that is fine because I hadn't expected much from that idiot Renzo. It works even better for me because you and soon the Hokage won't know who it was that gave the Fuma that information. Maybe it was Suna," Danzo thought condescendingly, with a small smirk crossing his wrinkled face as he thought of the many possible outcomes that could come to be thanks to the Fuma's failure. "That is okay though, because if you fell so easy, the conquest wouldn't have been worth it. My instincts tell me that you will be one conquest that I will enjoy undertaking and basking in once I am on top." Naruto Uzumaki Uchiha. Danzo mused internally as his thoughts once again shifted, this time from Naruto to the greater goal. Then I will be coming after you, Namikaze, and I will bring the perfect weapon with me to defeat you. I will use your own son as nothing but a tool to pave my way to the seat of the Rokudame Hokage. No one except the walls of the underground base heard the dry laughter of the old war hawk as he once again envisioned himself standing on top of the Hokage's mansion as his hidden leaf village was rebuilt out of the flames. The same flames that would cleanse the village of the moronic notion of the will of fire that he could replace with a cold hard logic and a generally more cutthroat attitude that would once again place Konoha at the top of the ninja world, a position that no one would dare challenge. And he would be the strongest shinobi inside of this utopia. He had faith that this would come to be because his plans always provided the desired results. Always.